The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking. It hit the windshield of my beat-up '99 Civic with a fury that felt personal. The FDR drive was a river of blurred taillights, a slick, black mirror reflecting a city that didn't care if I lived or died. It was 11:47 p.m., Friday, and I was running. My name is Arya Collins. I'm 24 years old, and until about 72 hours ago, I was just an overworked physical therapy intern at one of New York's biggest hospitals. Just another girl from the Rust Belt, trying to scrub the Ohio grime off her future. A girl who knew the value of hard work and, thanks to the man I'd just left, the sting of a misplaced trust. The bruises from my Wall Street ex-boyfriend had finally started to fade, but the psychological ones were still tender to the touch, which is why I was stupid enough to do this. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. My bag, sitting on the passenger seat, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It didn't hold textbooks. It held a single, encrypted hard drive. Proof. Proof that the hospital's head of logistics was diverting thousands of bottles of pain medication, skimming them, selling them, feeding the very same crisis that had hollowed out my hometown. I'd seen the fake patient logs, the altered inventory reports. I was supposed to be helping people recover, not watching as the tools of recovery were stolen to create more suffering. And someone knew I had it. I'd seen the black sedan 2 blocks after I left my apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid. By the time I hit the highway, paranoia had turned into cold, sharp certainty. It hung back, just far enough to be deniable, but close enough that I couldn't lose it in the storm. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. I was supposed to meet a reporter, a real one. Now, I wasn't sure I'd even make it to the next exit. The sedan's headlights suddenly filled my rearview mirror, blindingly bright. They were done playing. They accelerated, their engine a low growl under the storm. "No, no, no," I whispered. I stomped on the gas. My little Civic whined in protest, fishtailing on the wet pavement. The sedan swerved into the lane beside me, pacing me. I could see 2 shadows inside. They were trying to box me in, to force me off the road. I saw my chance a small gap ahead. I yanked the wheel to the right, trying to cut them off. It was the wrong move. My tires hit a patch of standing water, hydroplaned. The world dissolved into a terrifying, weightless spin. I screamed as the concrete barrier of the highway median rushed toward me. I wrenched the wheel back, overcorrecting, and shot across 2 lanes of traffic. There was no time to brake. A wall of black metal. That's all I saw. A massive, gleaming black SUV, sitting stationary in the chaos I had created. The sound was deafening. A metallic shriek of tearing steel. The world snapped to white as the airbag exploded, punching the air from my lungs and slamming my head back against the seat. Then, silence. A ringing in my ears, the smell of burnt powder and hot plastic. Rain was pouring in through my shattered driver's side window. I was gasping, tasting copper, blood. My car was destroyed. Its front end crumpled like a soda can against the rear quarter panel of a Cadillac Escalade. An Escalade so black and polished it looked like it had been carved from obsidian. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't find the release. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" A muffled sound, a car door opening and closing with a heavy, expensive thunk. Through the rain and the airbag dust, a figure emerged from the Escalade. He wasn't running, he wasn't yelling, he walked. He moved with a purpose that turned the storm into simple background noise. He was tall, 32, maybe. He wore a black suit that was already soaked through, the fine wool clinging to a frame that was all hard lines. His dark hair was slicked back by the rain. He was flanked by 2 other men, giants in matching black, but my eyes were locked on him. He stopped and looked at the mangled heap of my Civic. He looked at the deep gouge I'd left in his pristine truck. His face was calm, unreadable, like a mask carved from marble. I finally managed to pop the seatbelt, coughing as the dust settled. I had to get out, to apologize, to call the police. I looked past him, up the road, The black sedan that had been chasing me was gone. The second they saw who I'd hit, they'd vanished. The man walked to my window. He didn't seem to notice the rain, or the sirens now wailing in the distance. He just looked at me. His eyes weren't angry. They were a dark, assessing gray, and they held an authority that chilled me to the bone. He saw the cut on my forehead, the terror in my eyes, the white-knuckled grip I still had on my bag. One of his guards leaned in. "Boss," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That was Volkov's crew, the ones chasing her. They missed the shot." Missed the shot. The man in the suit, the boss, didn't look at his guard. His gaze remained locked on me, digging into my very core. It felt like he was seeing every mistake I'd ever made, every secret I'd ever kept. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something unidentifiable in his expression. Calculation. He spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried effortlessly over the storm. "Good. Now you're my wife." The world stopped spinning and just broke. "What?" The word came out as a choked rasp. I'm so sorry. I lost control. I'll call my insurance. What did you say?" He didn't blink. "You heard me." He gestured to my door. "Get out." One of his guards moved, pulling the handle. The door shrieked in protest but opened. "No, wait," I scrambled, grabbing my bag. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I have to call the police." The man laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "The police! The men who are chasing you will be back. The men who are chasing me," he said, gesturing to a fresh scrape on his Escalade that didn't look like it came from my car. "Or worse. You just drove yourself into the middle of a war. Sweetheart." He looked me up and down. "My name is Luca Santoro. A minute ago, you were a witness, a loose end. Those men who ran." He jerked his chin up the highway. "They saw you. They saw you hit me. In my world, you have about 10 minutes to live." My blood ran cold. He wasn't threatening me. He was stating a fact. "But," his eyes softened, "just a fraction. My wife, she's protected. My wife is untouchable." "You're insane," I whispered, clutching the hard drive through the fabric of my bag. "This isn't real." "It's very real." His guard, a man with the neck of a linebacker, gently but irresistibly took my arm. I flinched, a residual reaction from my last relationship. But his grip wasn't brutal. It was just final. "Please," I begged, trying to plant my feet on the wet asphalt. "I have evidence. I have to get it to someone." Luca's eyes flickered to my bag. "Evidence against Volkov, even better." He nodded to his man. "Get her in the car. We're leaving." I was bundled into the back of the Escalade. The door closed, sealing out the storm and sealing me in. The interior was silent, smelling of rich leather and something clean, like ozone. It was a rolling fortress. I watched through the tinted window as my mangled Civic, my last link to my old life, grew smaller. We weren't going to a police station. We weren't going to a hospital. We were driving deeper into Brooklyn, into a world I didn't know existed. We stopped 20 minutes later in front of a desolate stone church, one that looked like it hadn't seen a congregation in decades. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Protocol," Lucas said, pulling me out into the rain. Inside, it was cold. A single, ancient priest stood by a small altar, his hands trembling as he held a small book. He looked like he owed Luca more than just money. "This is a sacrilege," the priest whispered in a thick Italian accent. "It's a necessity, Father," Luca said, his voice echoing in the empty nave. He produced a document from his inner suit pocket. A marriage certificate. "No," I backed away, hitting a cold stone pew. "I won't. This is kidnapping." Luca Santoro stepped in front of me, blocking the only exit. He was close enough that I could feel the cold dampness rolling off his suit, see the exhaustion and the steel in his eyes. "Listen to me. Aria Collins," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Those men who were trying to kill me just failed. Because of you, by our laws, by the old ways, that makes me vulnerable until I am resecured. A wife, present at a new vow of protection, makes me untouchable. It's superstition, it's tradition, and it's the only thing that will keep my rivals at bay tonight. He leaned closer. And you? You crashed into my car right after they tried to kill me, and right after you stole something from them. They think you're with me. They think you're my associate, or my hostage. Either way, you're a target, but they will not touch my wife. He held out a pen. Sign this paper, and I will personally protect you and whatever is in that bag. Refuse, and I'll leave you right here on the steps for Volkov's men to find. I give you my word. They won't be as polite as I am. It wasn't a choice. It was a death sentence or a life sentence. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely hold the pen. The priest looked away, muttering something about forgiveness. I signed my name. Luca took the paper, signed his own, and handed it to the priest, who stamped it with a trembling hand. It is done, the priest said, looking like he wanted to be sick. It is. Luca agreed. He turned to me. The calculation was gone. His face was hard. He took my arm, his grip possessive now, and led me back out into the storm. Welcome to the family, Arya, he said, opening the SUV door. Now the real work begins. I fell into the leather seat, the hard drive a cold rectangle against my ribs. I was married, to a man I'd met 30 minutes ago, a man who had enemies who shot at him on the highway, a man who called himself Luca Santoro. I was no longer an intern. I was, apparently, a Mafia wife, and I was more trapped than I had ever been in my life. The ride from the church was silent, a vacuum-sealed bubble of leather and dread. We drove for what felt like hours, though the dashboard clock, a soft, analog glow, suggested it was only 20 minutes. We left the industrial streets and climbed, the SUV moving with a silent, heavy grace up the hills of what I recognized as Brooklyn Heights. We stopped, not at a curb, but before a set of towering wrought iron gates. They slid open without a sound, revealing a driveway that curved past a garden swallowed by the stormy night. The house, it wasn't a house. It was a mansion, a fortress of dark brick and ivy. Every window lit against the gloom, looking out over the churning black water of the East River. The lights of Manhattan glittered on the other side, a skyline of impossible, distant freedom. This was a prison made of velvet. Diego, the mountain of a man who had driven us, got out and opened my door. Luca hadn't spoken a word since the church. He simply got out and waited for me on the wide stone steps, the rain held at bay by a deep portico. I stepped out, clutching my bag. My sodden clothes felt like an icy shroud. Leave the car, Diego, Luca ordered. Double the perimeter watch. I want eyes on every street. Already done, boss, Diego rumbled. As we entered the foyer, the world shifted. The storm outside vanished, replaced by the scent of old wood, lemon oil. And was that fresh bread? The floor was black and white marble. A sweeping staircase disappeared into the shadows above. A woman was waiting for us. She was sharp, dressed in a tailored black pantsuit, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked at me, her eyes assessing, intelligent and utterly unwelcoming. She was holding a tablet. "This is her," the woman asked Luca, her voice crisp. "This is Arya," Luca said, shrugging off his wetsuit jacket. He didn't introduce me as his wife. It was a statement of fact. My wife. The woman's eyebrow twitched. "The certificate is filed electronically. Father Aurelio confirmed." She finally looked at me. Really looked. Taking in my soaked jeans and the blood drying on my forehead. "Bianca Marchetti," she said, not offering a hand. "I'm Mr. Santoro's legal counsel." "Get her something dry," Luca said, walking past us. "And food. Something hot. She looks half-starved." I flinched. The kindness was more disorienting than the threat. My ex, the finance guy, never noticed if I was hungry unless it inconvenienced him. This man, my kidnapper, had registered it in a single glance. "This way," Bianca said. Her tone clipped. She led me to a small, impossibly elegant bathroom and pointed to a stack of folded clothes on the counter. A soft gray sweatshirt, matching sweatpants, and thick wool socks. "Change. He'll want to see you in the study." When I emerged, warm and dry, but feeling like an imposter in borrowed clothes, Luca was waiting. He'd also changed, into a dark sweater and slacks, his hair still damp. He looked less like a crime boss and more like a weary CEO. He led me into a study that smelled of leather and old paper. The walls lined floor to ceiling with books. He closed the heavy oak doors. The sound was final. "The bag," he said. I clutched it. "You said you'd protect it." "I can't protect what I don't understand," he said, his patience thin. "You crashed your car into mine while running from Sergei Volkov's men. You are holding a hard drive that you seem to think is worth your life. Connect the dots for me. Aria." My hands trembled. I had no choice. I unzipped the bag and handed him the small, encrypted drive. I was an intern at New York General. Physical therapy. I saw discrepancies in the patient logs. Opioids, thousands of them. They were being diverted from the loading docks, signed out to phantom patients. Luca took the drive and plugged it into a sleek laptop on his desk. He typed, his fingers moving fast. The drive mounted. "It's all there," I whispered. "Shipping manifests, fake company names. It traces back to the head of logistics." Luca went still. He wasn't breathing. He scrolled, clicked, and then froze. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. He pointed to a name on a shipping invoice. A Shell Corporation. Acme Transport Logistics. "You know this name." "No, I assumed it was fake." "It is," Luca said, his voice a low growl. "It's one of Volkov's. This entire list, these are his shell companies." He stood up, turning to face me, and I realized the ground had just fallen out from under me. "You didn't just find a doctor stealing pills. Aria, you found the pipeline. Volkov isn't just selling this stuff. He's using the hospital supply chain to launder his cash. Millions. You just stumbled onto the bank." I sank into one of the leather chairs. "Oh my God. Those men, they weren't chasing me to get the drive back. They were chasing me to silence me." "Completely." Luca's face was grim. This changed everything. I wasn't just a random witness to his attempted assassination. I was the person holding the key to his enemy's entire financial structure. "This makes you the single most valuable target in New York City," he said. He sat on the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. The posture was casual, but his eyes were hard. "Which means we have rules. This marriage, this protection. It's not a suggestion, it's survival. Your survival, and mine." He held up a finger. "Rule 1. You are honest with me about everything. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you think. You do not lie. I can protect you from what I know. I can't protect you from a surprise." He held up a second. "Rule 2. You do not contact the police. You don't call 911. You don't call your friends. You don't call that reporter you were supposed to meet." "How did you—" "I had Diego check your phone," he said flatly. "Don't look at me like that. I just saved your life. The police are compromised. We know Volkov has a source inside the NYPD. We just don't know who. If you call them, you are calling him." "And Rule 3, he continued. "You do not leave this property. Not the garden, not the driveway, not for a walk, not without Diego, or without me. You are now, publicly, Aria Santoro. That is a role. It keeps you safe, but it means you are watched. You will play the part." He paused, letting the weight of the gilded cage settle on me. "Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. A soft knock. Bianca entered, followed by an older woman carrying a tray. It held a steaming bowl of soup, a glass of water, and the bread I'd smelled earlier. "Thank you, Elena," Luca said, his voice softening. He brought the tray to me. "Eat. You're no good to me if you collapse." I ate. The soup was a rich minestrone, and it was the best thing I'd ever tasted, the warmth spreading through my frozen limbs. I was a prisoner, eating my captor's food, and I hated myself for the gratitude I felt. Over the next few days, I learned the rhythm of the house. Diego Cruz was the shadow, the head of security, a man of few words and absolute loyalty. Bianca Marchetti was the brain, Luca's consigliere, and, I gathered from their easy arguments, his childhood friend. She ran the legal side of the Santoro empire, and she clearly viewed me as a complication. The enemy had a name, Sergei Volkov, 45, a Russian transplant who, according to a hushed argument I overheard between Luca and Bianca, preferred psychological warfare to open conflict. "He likes making me look weak," Luca had snarled. "The hit on the FDR, he knew my route. He knew the timing." "The mole," Bianca had replied, her voice tight. "It's the only way. Someone on the inside is selling your schedule. Luca." That was the tension humming beneath the polished floors. Luca was being hunted, and the traitor was inside his own walls. I was given relative freedom, which meant I could use the library. I spent hours surrounded by books I couldn't focus on, watching the armed guards patrol the gardens. On the third day, the house exploded into chaos. I was in the library when I heard the shouting. A black car screeched up the driveway, stopping haphazardly by the front steps. Diego was yelling orders. I ran to the foyer just as two men burst in, carrying a third. It was a younger guard, maybe 20. His face was pale, his jacket soaked in red. "He's hit," one of them yelled. "Took a shot in the arm. Boss, we got ambushed meeting the contact." They laid him on the marble floor. Diego ripped the jacket open. The man, his name was Frankie, was bleeding. A lot. Diego balled up a cloth and pressed it directly onto the wound in Frankie's upper arm. Frankie screamed, a high, thin sound. "Put pressure on it," Diego yelled. "You're doing it wrong." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Diego looked up, his face murderous. "Stay back, Mrs. Santoro." "I'm a physical therapist," I said, my voice shaking but firm. My training kicked in, shoving the fear aside. "I know anatomy. You're pressing on the wound, but you're missing the artery. He's going to bleed out, and if you keep pressing like that, you'll destroy the nerves. He'll lose the arm." The men stared at me. "Get me 2 belts. Now," I commanded. "And a clean, rolled-up towel, not a wadded-up one." A man scrambled to obey. I dropped to my knees beside Frankie. "Hey, Frankie, my name is Arya. I'm going to help you. It's going to hurt." I took the rolled towel and pressed it high up, under his armpit, jamming it against the brachial artery. "Hold this," I ordered Diego, guiding his hand. "Press here, hard." I took the belts, looped them, and created a makeshift tourniquet high on his shoulder, securing the pressure point. The bright red pulsing flow slowed to a dark ooze. "Elevate his legs," I said to the other guard. "He's in shock. Get him a blanket." I stayed there, my hands covered in his blood, talking to Frankie, keeping him conscious, monitoring his pulse until Luca's private doctor arrived 15 minutes later. Luca had appeared at some point. He stood on the stairs, watching the entire thing, his face unreadable. The doctor took over. "Whoever did this," the doctor said, looking at the pressure bandage, "saved his arm and his life." Diego looked at me. It wasn't gratitude, it was respect. Later that night, Luca found me in the kitchen, scrubbing Frankie's blood from under my fingernails. "You did good work today," he said quietly from the doorway. I kept scrubbing, my hands raw. This is your life, isn't it, people getting hurt? This is the life I was given, he said. I turned off the water and faced him, my fear finally eclipsed by a cold anger. That hard drive, you're going to use it. You're going to go after Volkov. He came after me. He's using your hospital to poison this city. Yes, I am. Then I have a rule for you, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Luca raised an eyebrow. That data, it leads back to my hospital. There are nurses there who work 16-hour shifts, patients who are sick, janitors just trying to feed their families. They are innocent. I stepped toward him. You want to go to war, you do it, but you do not touch them. You don't cause a fight in those halls. You don't hurt civilians. That's my condition. He studied me for a long moment. I was challenging him, the man who held my life in his hands. I saw something shift in his gaze. He wasn't just looking at the woman he'd forced into a marriage. He was looking at the woman who had saved his man. My family has rules, Arya, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. We do not harm innocents. We do not hurt children. That is the difference between us and men like Volkov. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. You have my word. We will target only those responsible. The civilians will be protected. It wasn't a promise of freedom, but it was a promise of humanity, a shared moral line drawn in the sand. And in that fortress, surrounded by killers, it was the first time I'd felt a single, terrifying breath of safety. My agreement with Luca, the no civilians rule, it changed something. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't acceptance. It was a contract. It meant I couldn't just sit in his gilded library, waiting for this to be over. I was the one who had brought the storm, and I was the only one who could read the weather map. The next morning, I found Luca and Bianca in the study. The hard drive was on the screen, its contents splayed out in a maze of spreadsheets. Bianca didn't look up when I walked in. The coffee is on the sideboard, Mrs. Santoro. A polite dismissal. I'm not here for coffee, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I walked straight to the desk. You're looking at it wrong. Bianca finally lifted her head, her sharp eyes flashing with annoyance. Excuse me? You're looking for financial ties, I said, pointing at the screen. You're tracing the money. That's not where the proof is. The proof is in the medicine. Luca, who had been watching from the window, turned. Explain. These patient files, I pointed. You see a list of names. I see impossibilities. This patient is listed as receiving 200 milligrams of oxycodone every 4 hours, but his chart also says he's on a naloxone drip. You can't give an opioid to someone on an overdose reversal drug. It's medical nonsense. And this one, I clicked, is listed as deceased at 4:03 p.m., but he's apparently still being prescribed medication 2 days later. These aren't just fakes, they're lazy fakes. I could see a new respect in Luca's eyes. Bianca was leaning in, her skepticism replaced by calculation. The head of logistics, doctor. Mason, he isn't just skimming. He's creating phantom patients to match the inventory he's stealing. But he's not a clinician. His details are sloppy. I can trace every fake file. I can prove which shipments were stolen before you even look at the money. For 2 days, we worked, me, Luca, and Bianca. A strange, unholy trinity. I sat at that massive oak desk, cross-referencing patient data with shipping manifests. I found the connection I'd been looking for. Every single stolen shipment was handled by one company, the same one Luca had identified. Acme Transport Logistics, Volkov's company. I had just built the entire case, linking the hospital logistics director directly to the Russian Mafia, all on a foundation of medical malpractice. On the 3rd day, Luca walked in and dropped a heavy coat on my chair. It was dark wool, lined with cashmere, and impossibly soft. Put it on, he said. I looked up from the screen. Why? We're going out. My blood ran cold. Out, you said I couldn't leave. You're my wife, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's time you saw what that means. Diego will be with us. I was terrified. Leaving the fortress meant I was a target, but as I slid my arms into the coat, the warmth enveloping me, I realized this was also a test. We didn't go to a 5-star restaurant or a fancy charity gala. Diego drove us deep into a part of Brooklyn that the tourists never see. We pulled up to a squat, gray building, a church, but a humble one. Its cross barely visible in the fading light. This wasn't the desolate, terrifying place I'd been married in. This place was alive. The scent of roasting chicken and soup hit me as soon as we entered the basement. It was a homeless shelter, a community dinner, and the man I'd been forced to marry was the one funding it. He wasn't Luca Santoro boss here. He was Mr. Luca. He moved through the tables, greeting people by name. He spoke to a man in a tattered army jacket about his VA benefits. He knelt to speak to a woman who was clutching a small, sleeping child, listening to her story with a quiet intensity. He handed an envelope to the man running the kitchen. Father Aurelio, the priest from the abandoned church, was here, serving mashed potatoes. He saw me and looked away, his face a mask of shame. I stood by the wall, a ghost in a $1,000 coat. This was the other side of the Santoro empire. This was the kindness that Luca's power bought. It was calculated. Yes, it was community support. It was loyalty, but it was also real. The food was real. The warmth was real. He was protecting these people. It was profoundly disorienting. A man who could force a woman into marriage to protect his own skin was also the man making sure 100 people had a hot meal on a Tuesday night. The illusion shattered when we returned to the mansion. Bianca was waiting in the foyer. Her face pale, she held up her tablet. It's a problem. On the screen was a grainy video clip, clearly shot with a cell phone. It was me from that first night. Outside the abandoned church, it showed Luca, his face hard in the stormy light, pulling me from the escalade. I looked exactly like what I was terrified, wild-eyed, my face streaked with rain and the blood from my forehead. The headline on the gossip blog beneath it read, "Brooklyn's new queen tycoon Luca Santoro's mystery bride looks forced." My stomach turned to ice. Who? Volkov, Luca snarled. He wasn't yelling. His voice went dangerously quiet. This is his move. Psychological. He's not trying to kill me. He's trying to delegitimize me. He's painting me as a brute, a kidnapper. But that's what you did, I whispered, the words out before I could stop them. Luca's eyes locked on mine. The air crackled. What I did, he said slowly, was protocol. What he is doing is painting a target on your back and on mine. The phones are ringing, Bianca said, cutting the tension. The New York Post, the Daily News. They want to comment on the reluctant bride. Before I could process this new threat, my personal phone, which Diego had cleared and returned to me, buzzed on the hall table. I looked at Luca. He nodded. The caller ID made my heart stop. Mom? I snatched it up. Mom, are you okay? Aria, honey, thank goodness. Her voice was shaky, trying too hard to sound normal. I just had the strangest visit. 2 men. They came to the diner. I was already shaking my head, my blood turning to ice. Mom, what men? What did they say? Oh, they were very polite. Honey, thick accents, Russian, I think. They just asked about you, if you were happy, if you'd met someone special in New York. They said to tell you, they said, we are so glad she is being taken care of. Aria, what's going on? Who are these people? He found her. Volkov had found my mother in Ohio. I ended the call, promising I was fine, that it was just a misunderstanding. I hung up, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the phone. I turned to Luca, my terror replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. He found my mother. Luca's face, which had been tight with anger at the media, went utterly still. The air left the room. This was a line Volkov had just crossed. "This is my fault," I said, my voice low. "I'm the one he's using. That video. My mother, he's doing it because I look like your prisoner. Because I am your prisoner." "Aria." "No!" I shouted. "You want to play this game? You want to use this marriage as a shield? Then we use it. We stop hiding. Hiding makes me look weak. It makes me look like a victim. It makes her." I jabbed a finger toward the phone. "A target. You want to show him I'm not your hostage. You want to protect my mother. Then you and I are going to be the happiest, most in-love couple this city has ever seen. We are going to walk out of this house in public, and we are going to smile." Luca stared at me. The calculation in his eyes was replaced by something else. Admiration. "He wants to attack my legitimacy," Luca said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Fine. We'll give him legitimacy. Bianca, schedule a reservation for 2 at Cipriani tomorrow night, and call our contact at the post. Tell them Mr. and Mrs. Santoro will be happy to provide an exclusive." The shift was terrifying. I'd just chosen my side, publicly. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I found Luca on the 3rd-floor terrace, a glass of dark liquid in his hand, looking out at the city that was now his battlefield. I walked out, pulling my borrowed coat tight. The wind was sharp. We stood in silence for a full minute. The city lights a distant, cold fire. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice small. "Why the violence, the risk? You have all this." I gestured to the mansion, the city. "Why is it worth it?" He didn't look at me. He stared at the Brooklyn Bridge, a black spiderweb in the distance. "When I was 15, he said, his voice a low rumble, "my father was shot, right in our driveway. He didn't die, but he never walked again." I stood frozen. This was not a story he told lightly. "It wasn't a rival," he continued, swirling the glass. "It was a warning. My father's business was logistics, shipping, protection, but he had rules, firm rules, no drugs, and no cargo that breathed." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes black holes in the dark. He refused to move people. He refused to get into human trafficking. The men he refused, they wanted to make an example of him. They put him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He took a sip. "Sergei Volkov," he said, and his voice was pure ice. "Built his entire American enterprise on the cargo my father refused. That is the man who is sending people to your mother's diner. That's the difference between him and me. He deals in addiction and flesh. I deal in loyalty. So, yes, Aria, it's worth it." I saw him then, not the boss, not my kidnapper, but a son, forged in a fire I couldn't imagine, trying to hold a line his father had drawn in blood. It didn't excuse the cold church, or the paper I'd signed under duress, but it explained everything. My response was cut short by a sound that didn't belong, a low thump, thump, thump. And then every light in the mansion, every light on the block, went out. We were plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. "Luca!" Diego's voice roared from inside. The emergency generators kicked in, but not with a roar. They sputtered, died, then kicked in again, casting the terrace in a sickly red emergency light. "They cut the grid," Luca said, shoving me toward the door. "Get inside, now!" We ran into the study, which had become a war room. Diego was at the door. Bianca was frantically typing at the main security console, which was running on a battery backup. "It's a massive attack," she said, her voice strained. "DDoS. They're hammering the firewall. They're trying to blind us. All external cameras are offline." "Get the men on the perimeter," Luca ordered Diego. "This is a probe. They're testing the defenses. They're getting ready for a ground assault." Diego vanished. Luca went to a safe in the wall, pulling out a handgun. I just stared at Bianca's screen. The logs were scrolling by, a waterfall of data. It was chaos. Thousands of signals from all over the world, hammering the house. "He's not just trying to get in," I said, my mind racing. My work at the hospital, I'd taken a semester of biomedical systems. I knew how data flowed. "This is a distraction." "What?" Bianca snapped, not looking up. "It's a biological response," I said, thinking aloud. "You flood the system with a massive, systemic infection to hide the real one, the small one. You're looking at the incoming attack. Look at the outgoing packets." Bianca's fingers flew. She filtered the log. And there it was. A tiny, almost invisible string of data. A single packet, broadcasting out from our network, repeating every 3 seconds. A digital heartbeat. "What is that?" Luca asked. Walking over, the gun held low. "It's a beacon," I whispered. "It's not trying to get in. It's already in. It's telling them where to go. It's a kick-me sign." Bianca's face went white. She traced the signal's origin. Her fingers stopped. "Where?" Luca demanded. Bianca looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's coming from inside the main security hub, from Diego's personal terminal." The silence in the room was absolute. Diego, Luca's shadow, the man who had driven me, protected me, the man who had been with the family for 20 years. Just then, the main lights flickered and roared back to life. The attack stopped. The beacon vanished. Diego walked back in, his face grim. "All clear, boss. They pulled back. Just a probe, like you said." Luca looked at him. His face was a perfect, cold mask. "Good work, Diego. Get some rest." But the trust was gone. The mole wasn't just a rumor. He was real. And I had just proven he was the man standing right in front of us. The silence that followed the blackout was worse than the alarm. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket of suspicion. The lights were back, but the systems were compromised. And the man Luca, Bianca and I now believed was the traitor, was calmly directing security patrols from the main hub. Diego. For 2 hours, we sat in the study, a silent triumvirate. Luca watched the internal security feeds on a laptop, his face an unreadable mask. He watched Diego check doors, speak into his radio, and move through the house with the easy confidence of a man who owned the place, a man Luca had trusted with his life since they were teenagers. I watched Luca watch Diego. The tension was so thick I could barely breathe. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. Every whisper of the wind was an assassin. Then, the clock on the mantel read 3:13 a.m. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a thump. A soft, heavy sound, like a bag of sand dropped on the lawn. Then another, and another. "Grappling hooks," Luca whispered, his voice lethally calm. He was already moving. The sound of shattering glass erupted from the conservatory. It wasn't an explosion. It was a precise, quiet breach. The alarms remained silent. The malware, the beacon, it had done its job. "Arya, panic room, now!" Luca commanded, pulling the gun from the small of his back. "Luca, the ground floor is breached," Bianca said, her eyes fixed on the feeds, which were now flickering as Volkov's men cut the internal camera wires one by one. "Get to the panic room," he snarled at her. "Lock it down. Do not open it until I come for you. That's an order." He grabbed my arm, his grip like steel, and half-dragged me down the hall to the small, reinforced door hidden behind a bookshelf. He shoved Bianca in first, then me. "Luca, wait!" I cried. He looked at me, his eyes black in the dim emergency lighting. "Stay alive." He slammed the door. I heard the heavy thunk of the magnetic locks engaging. The room was small, a steel box lined with shelves of water and medical supplies. The only view of the outside world was a bank of high-definition monitors. wired directly to armored cameras that Volkov's men hadn't found yet.
We were safe. We were also blind. They're inside,
Bianca whispered, her voice trembling.
I could hear them, muffled shouts in Russian, the pop-pop-pop of suppressed gunfire. Not the roar of a battle, but the quick, methodical sounds of an extermination.
Then I heard Luca's voice, not from the monitors, but from an intercom speaker. Bianca, talk to me. Where are they? Bianca grabbed the receiver.
They split, 4 heading up the main staircase. 6 are sweeping the west wing. Toward you, Luca, they know the layout.
Because Diego is leading them. He bit out, where is he?
I can't see him. His tracker is static. A new burst of noise, closer this time, the sound of wood splintering. They were in the study, right outside our door.
A heavy crack echoed through the steel. They were testing the panic room door. Bianca stifled a scream, backing away.
It'll hold,
I said, trying to steady my own voice. Another sound, a different kind of gunfire. Luca's, deeper, more authoritative. Followed by a spray of static as bullets struck the wall near the intercom.
Aria,
Luca's voice was tight with strain.
He's not with them. Diego, he's engaging them on the 2nd floor. He's fighting with us.
My blood went cold. Then the beacon.
A sudden, sharp zing ricocheted inside the steel room. Bianca cried out, a sharp, choked sound.
I turned. She was clutching her shoulder, her face white. A bullet, fired at an extreme angle, had punched through the intercom grate. It hadn't been aimed, just a wild spray, but it had found her.
I'm hit,
she whispered, looking at her hand, now slick with dark blood.
Sit down,
I said, my training taking over. I tore open the nearest medical kit. It was a bad graze, deep along the collarbone, but it wasn't pumping. Arterial blood wasn't my first worry. Shock and blood loss were. I pressed a wad of gauze to the wound. Hold this hard. I looked at the monitors. The armored cameras were still active. I could see the main hall. It was chaos. Volkov's men, dressed in black tactical gear, were moving with terrifying precision. And I saw Luca. He was using a heavy marble pillar as cover, exchanging short bursts of fire.
But something was wrong. They aren't trying to kill him,
I whispered. Bianca looked at me, her face pale.
What?
Look, I pointed to the screen.
They have a clear shot, 2 of them, but they're aiming at his feet. They're forcing him back, hurting him. They're trying to pin him against the front door. They're capturing him.
Bianca realized, her voice hollow.
Volkov wants him alive.
Luca! I yelled into the intercom. It's a trap. They're pushing you to the entrance. They're trying to take you.
I'm a little busy.
Aria, he yelled back. The beacon wasn't Diego, I said, my mind racing, trying to put the pieces together. The blackout, the signal, the rhythm of the signal, that tiny, repeating heartbeat of data. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause.
Where had I heard that before?
My mind flashed back to the community dinner, the steam from the potatoes, the clatter of plates, and Father Aurelio, his back to me, serving food, his hand, his thumbnail. He was tapping his thumbnail against the stainless steel serving spoon. A nervous habit. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause.
Oh my God,
I breathed.
Bianca, the trace, the signal from Diego's terminal. It was a spoof. He was framed.
What are you talking about? Bianca winced, pressing on the gauze.
It was Aurelio, I said, my voice shaking. Father Aurelio is the mole.
The intercom crackled.
He's right, child. It wasn't Luca. It was Father Aurelio, his voice thin and reedy, coming over a different channel, the chapel line. Father,
Luca's voice was ice.
He found me. Luca.
Aurelio's voice was choked with sobs.
Volkov he knew. From before I took my vows. Things I did in Boston. A man who was hurt.
I thought it was buried. He said he would expose me, destroy the church, the shelter, everything."
"So you sold me!" Luca roared.
I tried to atone. The priest wept. "I couldn't let him take you. I told Volkov's men the main armory was in the sub-basement. I gave them the codes." "You what?" Bianca said. "It's a decoy," Aurelio whispered. "It's a reinforced concrete box. A vault. I told them that's where you kept your weapons. But it's empty. Luca, it's a trap. Most of his men are down there right now, trying to breach a solid steel door." A new set of alarms, loud and blaring, suddenly screamed through the house. "I just triggered the internal lockdown for that vault," Aurelio said. "They're trapped down there, but not all of them. The breach team, the one sent to capture you, they're still in the hall." "Father, where are you?" Luca demanded. "In the chapel. I'm sorry. My son." The line went dead. Luca's voice came back, sharp and urgent. "Arya, Bianca's bleeding. The team in the hall, there are 4 of them. I can't take them and hold the position." I looked at Bianca. She was pale, but her eyes were clear. "I'm fine. Go." "Go where?" I said. "Your medical bag." Luca said, "The one you used on Frankie. Where is it?" "It's in the study, outside the door." "I need you to open the door, grab the bag, and throw me the chemical smoke packs, the ones for testing airflow." I knew what he meant. They were non-toxic, but they created an impenetrable cloud of white smoke. "They'll be right outside the door," I whispered. "On my count," Luca said. "I'll draw their fire. Be fast." I stood by the heavy steel door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. Bianca was watching the monitor. "He's reloading," Bianca said. "Now, Luca, now." I heard Luca open fire, a deafening roar that made the walls vibrate. "Now, Arya." I slammed my hand on the red button. The locks disengaged. I wrenched the door open. The study was a wreck, furniture overturned. 2 of Volkov's men were right there, turning, their weapons raising. I didn't think. I dove for my bag, which was sitting by the desk. I ripped it open, grabbed the 3 foil-wrapped packets, and scrambled back. "Luca!" I screamed, and hurled them underhanded into the main hall. The men outside the door opened fire. Bullets chewed the door frame where my head had been seconds before. I slammed the door, the locks re-engaging just as a body hit it from the outside. I ran back to the monitors. The hallway was gone. It was a dense, billowing white cloud. "Mouths covered," Luca yelled. I couldn't see anything on the monitors. Just white, but I could hear. There were no gunshots. Just a series of sharp, wet thuds, grunts, the sound of heavy bodies hitting the floor, the sickening crack of a bone breaking. Then, silence. The smoke began to clear. Luca was standing in the middle of the hall, breathing heavily. The 4 men were on the floor around him, disarmed, groaning, and secured with zip ties. He hadn't ended them. He dismantled them. "It's clear," Luca said over the intercom. "Arya, bring the first aid kit, now." I opened the door and ran out, past the groaning men. The house was a disaster. Priceless art was riddled with bullet holes. The garden, visible through the shattered conservatory, was destroyed. Diego ran down the stairs, his face streaked with soot. "Boss, the sub-basement is secure. We've got a dozen of them trapped like rats. The rest, they're in retreat." Luca just nodded, his eyes already moving past Diego, toward the chapel wing. He started to run. I followed. We found Father Aurelio on the stone floor of the small chapel, half hidden behind the altar. "No!" Luca breathed, rushing to his side. He was bleeding, a single dark stain spreading across his chest. "A sniper," Aurelio whispered, coughing. "He was waiting. For the capture it failed." "Stay with me, Father," I said, dropping to my knees, pressing my hands to the wound. It was hopeless. I knew it instantly. It was central, too high. Arya, step back, Luca said gently, brushing my hands away. He knelt and took the old priest's hand.
I failed you, my son.
Aurelio choked.
You saved us, Father, Luca said, his voice thick.
No penance. The priest gripped the front of Luca's shirt with a sudden, desperate strength. The hard drive, it's a decoy. Volkov's real server, his whole network. The password. He coughed, and a spray of blood hit Luca's face. He didn't flinch. Aurelio whispered a phrase. It was Latin, misericordia et veritas, mercy and truth. He followed it with a string of numbers. His hand went slack. His eyes stared past Luca, at the cross on the altar. I sat back on my heels, my hands covered in the priest's blood. The smoke was clearing. The distant sound of sirens, real police, finally grew louder. Luca stayed there for a long time, his head bowed. The mansion was silent, save for the sound of Volkov's routed, trapped men banging on a steel door in the basement. Finally, he stood up. He looked at the destruction. He looked at the body of the man who had both betrayed and saved him. Then he looked at me. Arya, he said, his voice a raw, empty thing. When this is over, we will only go after the guilty. He wiped the blood from his face with the back of his hand.
Volkov, Doctor, Mason. The men who came here tonight, no one else, no civilians, no families. I swear on his soul, this ends with them.
He offered me his hand, pulling me to my feet. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a promise, a shared declaration of war, built on a new, shared moral code. The dawn that followed the attack was cold and gray, the color of ash. The mansion was a tomb quiet save for the sounds of boarding up windows and the hushed, angry voices of Luca's men. Father Aurelio's body was gone, taken to a Santoro-owned funeral home, but his presence lingered. A stain of betrayal and sacrifice I couldn't wash away. Bianca and I were in the study, which had become the permanent war room. Her arm was in a sling, her face pale but set with a lawyer's icy resolve. My hands were clean, but I could still feel the priest's blood under my nails. We had the password, misericordia et veritas, mercy and truth.
Let's see what his mercy and truth bought us,
Bianca muttered, typing the Latin phrase and the numbers into a new terminal. We weren't just hacking a server. We were kicking in the door to Volkov's entire digital life. The screen flooded with files. It was an ocean of darkness. Bianca, with her sharp, financial mind, went straight for the money.
Charities,
she breathed, her eyes widening.
He's not just using shells, he's washing it through nonprofits, a veteran support fund, 3 different opioid recovery clinics. He's using the very crisis he's creating to clean his cash.
I felt sick, but I wasn't looking at the money. I was looking for the man. My mind was still in data mode, looking for patterns, for the lazy mistakes. He has a calendar, I said, clicking on a file. It's not encrypted. He's arrogant. It was all there, meetings, payoffs, shipments, and then I saw it. An entry for tomorrow, 7 p.m., Staten Island docks, Pier 4. Finalized transport. Luca entered, his face carved from stone. He hadn't slept. What do we have? We have everything, Bianca said, turning the screen. His money, his network, and his schedule. He's meeting someone tomorrow night. Good, Luca said. The word was a razor.
Diego, get the team ready. Heavy loadout. We're ending this.
No. The word was out of my mouth before I could stop it. Both of them turned to look at me. No, Luca repeated, his voice dangerously low.
You gave me your word, I said, standing up, my legs shaking. You swore on Father Aurelio's soul. No civilians. The Staten Island docks. It's not a private compound. It's a working pier.
There will be union workers, crewmen, security guards, innocent people.
They are in my way. Arya. Then you find a way around them,
I insisted. my voice rising. "You go in there with a full team, guns blazing, and you're no better than he is. You're just another monster fighting over territory. You want to honor your father. You want to honor Aurelio. You do this clean." Luca stared at me, a silent, brutal war happening behind his eyes. The desire for vengeance was a physical thing, rolling off him in waves. But I saw the promise, the one he'd made in the chapel, fighting against it. "A clean war," he finally said, his voice raw. "What does that look like, Arya?" "It looks like this," I said, turning to the screen. "A two-pronged attack. You and Bianca, you hit the money. Right now, you use this data. You call your contacts. You freeze every one of these fake charities. You cut off his cash flow, his escape route. Before we even get there, you leave him with nothing but that one meeting." "And the second prong?" Luca asked, his eyes narrowing. "Me," I said. "He knows I'm the key to the hospital data. He thinks I'm your weakness. I'll go to the pier. I'll pretend to negotiate. I'll offer to trade the original drive, the one he thinks is the only copy, in exchange for my mother's safety. I'll be the distraction, the civilian in the room. He'll feel in control." "Absolutely not," Luca said. At the same time, Bianca said, "That's insane." "It's the only way," I argued. "While I'm talking, while he's focused on me, then your team moves in. Quietly, no gunfire, just containment. You take him alive. Luca, you take him clean." Luca watched me for a long, agonizing minute. I was asking him to risk me, the one person he had sworn to protect, to uphold a moral code I had forced on him. "Diego," Luca said, his voice flat, "get me our clean contacts at the FBI. Tell them we're about to deliver a gift, and get the medical teams, 2 ambulances. I want them staged 1 block from the pier. My men go in, but they are on strict orders, capture only, non-lethal takedowns. We create a safe zone, and we get the real civilians out first." He looked at me, his face a mask of iron. "You go in, but I will be in your ear, and the second it goes wrong, the deal is off." The following night, the air at the Staten Island docks was thick with salt and diesel. It was cold. I was wearing a wire, with a tiny earpiece that fed me the sound of Luca's breathing from a van 2 streets away. "He's here," Luca's voice whispered in my ear. "Just him and 2 guards. He's on the ship, a rusted-out cargo freighter at the end of the pier." I walked, my legs feeling like cement. This was it. I was walking willingly toward the man who had stalked my mother, the man who had ordered the attack on the mansion. I boarded the freighter. The deck was slick with rust. Sergei Volkov stood near the bow, a silhouette against the distant lights of the Verrazzano Bridge. He was older, 45 perhaps, and dressed in an immaculate suit. He was smiling. "Arya Collins," he said, his voice a smooth, cold baritone. "The intern who started a war. I must say, I'm impressed." "Let's just get this over with," I said, clutching the decoy hard drive. "You guarantee my mother's safety, and this is yours." "Safety is such a relative term," Volkov mused. He stepped aside, and my heart stopped. There was a man tied to a chair, gagged, his eyes wide with terror. "You know, Doctor Miller, I presume?" Volkov asked. It was my father, not my biological one, but the man who had raised me from the time I was 8. Dr. Robert Miller, a kind, brilliant anesthesiologist from my hometown in Ohio. "Dad," I whispered. The word was stolen from my lungs. "He was so easy to find," Volkov said, circling the chair. "He has been very cooperative. Did you know, Arya, that your sainted father had a small mistake about 10 years ago? A patient, a young man, a simple procedure. But Dr. Miller here, he miscalculated. The patient never woke up. The family sued. But it was settled. Buried." Volkov waved a hand. However I found the evidence. It was so simple to convince him to come to New York. He thought he was advising on a new medical venture, You blackmailed him, I choked out. I use the tools I am given. Volkov said, just as you use yours, and just as you have a weakness for healing, a flaw. One of his guards, a mountain of a man, moved to stand behind my father's chair. He pulled out a long, thin knife. The drive, Arya, Volkov said, holding out his hand. Arya, do not move. Luca's voice was a frantic whisper in my ear. Diego is moving. You won't get off this ship. Volkov, I said, my voice shaking. Luca's people are everywhere. I know, Volkov smiled. And they are very disciplined. They won't shoot. Not while your father is here. This is a stalemate. My dear, except I hold the only piece that matters to you. The guard pressed the knife to my father's throat. I saw it, the guard's posture. He was arrogant, relaxed. His hand was on my father's shoulder, pressing down. My eyes traced the line of his arm, from his wrist to his elbow, to the spot just below his ear. My medical training wasn't a flaw, it was a weapon. Arya, no, Luca breathed, sensing my shift. I took one step forward. Okay, you win. I held out the drive. The guard loosened his grip, his eyes on the drive. It was the opening I needed. I didn't lunge, I moved. In one fluid, practiced motion. I dropped the drive, spun to the guard's side, and jammed the heel of my palm up and under his jaw, striking the pressure point for the vagus nerve. At the same instant, I brought my other hand down, a sharp, precise blade hand strike, directly onto his brachial plexus, where the nerves cluster at the side of the neck. It wasn't a punch, it was a neurochemical shutdown. The man's eyes rolled back. His body didn't just fall, it switched off. He collapsed in a heap, the knife clattering to the deck. Volkov's smile vanished. He stared at his fallen man in disbelief. Now, Luca, I screamed. The world exploded. Not with gunfire, but with motion. Diego and 4 men, all in black, rose from the shadows of the deck. They moved in perfect, silent coordination. It's over! Sergei! Luca's voice boomed. Not from my earpiece, but from the deck. He stepped out from behind a shipping container, a small, hidden camera pinned to his lapel. You're financially ruined. Your men in the mansion are in federal custody, and you just confessed to kidnapping and extortion on a live feed. Volkov looked at Luca. He looked at me, frantically untying my father. He looked at the men surrounding him. He was trapped. And then he laughed. So, you think you've won, he hissed. You think this ends here if I don't walk off this ship? No one does. He lunged, not for a gun, but for a small, metal box welded to the ship's railing. He ripped the cover off, revealing a keypad and a single, ugly red toggle switch, a dead man's switch. This whole pier is wired, he screamed, his hand hovering over the switch. Explosives from my transport division. This whole ship goes up. Arya, get your father back, Luca ordered, his voice level, his gun now trained on Volkov. But I wasn't looking at my father. I was looking at the device, under the dim pier lights. I could see the wiring. It was sloppy. The wires were coated in different colored plastics. One was standard red. The other was a dull, chemical blue. My mind flashed back to the data. The shipping manifest from Volkov's company, Acme Transport Logistics, the line item for industrial polymer coating, cobalt-based, non-corrosive, used for wiring on their deep-sea containers. It's the blue one, I said, walking toward him. Arya, get back, Luca yelled. He's not stupid enough to make the failsafe red, I said, my voice clear and steady. It's the blue wire. That's his company's specific coating. It's the detonator. The red one is a decoy. Volkov's eyes widened. He hadn't expected me to know that. He lunged for the switch. I was faster. I grabbed the medical shears I'd palmed from my pocket, the ones I'd used on Bianca, and shoved my hand into the box. I didn't cut the red wire. I sliced straight through the blue. Nothing happened. The tiny green light on the panel flickered and died. Volkov stared at the dead box. He looked at me. His face crumpled. It was over. "Take him," Luca ordered. Diego and his men moved in, cuffing a completely broken Sergei Volkov. I rushed to my father, cutting the ropes. He was shaking, sobbing, but he was alive. "It's okay, Dad, it's over. I've got you," I whispered, holding him. Luca walked over, the camera on his lapel still glowing. He looked at my father, then at me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, a deep, profound acknowledgement. He turned to Diego. "Get him processed. The Federals are waiting at the checkpoint. Give them Volkov, and give them this." He tapped the camera. "And a copy of the server data. We're not witnesses. Diego, we're just the citizens who provided the tip." He looked back at me, his eyes losing their iron hardness for just a second. He had kept his word. We had done it clean. The storm of the pier, the adrenaline, the fear, the sudden, sharp victory was replaced by the methodical, quiet hum of the aftermath. In the days that followed, the FBI, armed with Volkov's entire network and his own recorded confession, moved with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't a war, it was a harvest. Doctor. Mason was arrested at his desk at the hospital, his face a mask of disbelief. The shell companies, the fake charities, the transport logistics, they were all seized, frozen, and dismantled. My role was silent. I was never Aria Collins. I was never Aria Santoro. I was Witness C, an expert consultant brought in by a clean FBI contact. I spent 2 full days in a windowless federal building, a cup of bad coffee in my hand, walking prosecutors through the medical data. I showed them the ghost patients, the impossible prescriptions, the digital trail that proved, beyond any doubt, how the hospital supply chain had been weaponized. My testimony was the nail. Luca's name. My name. We were never mentioned in a single report. We were, as he'd promised, just the citizens who provided the tip. My foster father, Dr. Miller, gave his own testimony about the blackmail. His past mistake was just that, a terrible, tragic mistake, but not a crime. Volkov's leverage was gone. He returned to Ohio, shaken, but for the first time in a decade, he was free. We spoke on the phone. He was safe. I was safe. The mansion began to heal. The bullet holes were plastered, the shattered glass of the conservatory replaced, the heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the house, the fear of the mole. The threat of attack was gone. In its place was a strange, quiet vacuum. The first task of this new piece was to bury the old. Father Aurelio's memorial was not held in a grand cathedral. We held it in the basement of the community shelter he had run. The pews were folding chairs. The congregation wasn't made of men in dark suits. It was made of the people he had fed, the homeless veterans, the single mothers. They were the ones who truly mourned him. Luca, Bianca, Diego, and I sat in the front row. The themes of the service, led by a visiting priest, were redemption and forgiveness. Luca had asked me to speak. I stood at the simple wooden lectern, looking at the faces of the people Aurelio had served.
"I didn't know Father Aurelio for very long,"
I began, my voice trembling slightly.
"But I learned that people are complicated, that good people can be forced by fear into making terrible mistakes."
I looked at Luca. "But the measure of a person isn't the mistake they make. It's what they do to atone for it. His final act wasn't one of betrayal. It was one of truth, of sacrifice."
I thought of the password.
Misericordia et veritas. He gave his life to protect this community, to protect all of us. He bought our peace with his own. I will never forget that. When I sat down, Luca's hand rested on my knee for just a second, a silent acknowledgement. The Santoro organization, as I was learning to call it, began to change. The no civilians rule my rule. The one I had demanded in anger was now laminated. It was the first page in the new employee handbook. It was the Santoro directive. Diego, his name cleared, was not just reinstated, he was promoted. His new title wasn't just head of security, it was director of security and non-lethal intervention. I walked past the gardens now being replanted and saw him training a new class of recruits. He wasn't teaching them how to shoot. He was teaching them how to disarm. I saw my own knowledge, my medical training, reflected back at me as he demonstrated joint locks, nerve holds, and de-escalation tactics. He was weaponizing mercy. The biggest change, however, walked into the mansion 2 weeks later, carrying a suitcase and looking terrified.
"Oh, Arya,"
my mother whispered, looking up at the marble foyer.
"This place, it's a palace." "It's just a house, Mom,"
I said, hugging her tightly. She was safe. Luca had moved her from Ohio, setting her up in a beautiful, secure apartment in Park Slope, and he'd given her a job. Not a token position, but a real one, with a salary and benefits. She was the new office manager for the foundation we were building. It was our moral compensation, the Santoro Collins Health Access Fund. It was funded, ironically, by the assets Luca's lawyers had managed to reacquire from Volkov's frozen network of fake charities, the blood money, washed clean and turned back into medicine. I spent my days not in a library, but in an office, overseeing the creation of our first real project, a fully staffed, evidence-based residential treatment center for opioid addiction. We were creating scholarships for nursing students from the Rust Belt. We were building the safe housing that the community shelter couldn't provide. The war was over. The work was just beginning. And then there was Luca. With the threat gone, the foundation of our relationship was gone. The contract I'd signed in that cold church was meaningless. I was no longer his prisoner. I wasn't his shield. We existed in a polite, awkward orbit. We were allies who had won a war, but we were strangers living under the same roof. The electricity that had sparked between us, the fear, the anger, the respect, had settled into a quiet, unbearable tension. One night, I found him in the main kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator as if it held the answers to the universe. "You look lost," I said. He startled, turning. "Elena took the night off. I don't know how to work the stove." I laughed. A real, actual laugh. The sound was strange in that house. The man who can dismantle a 4-man tactical team is defeated by a gas range. "This," he said, gesturing to the stovetop, "doesn't come with instructions." "Here." I walked over, brushing past him to turn the knob. "Let me show you." We cooked. It was a disaster. He was clumsy, intense, mincing garlic like he was trying to intimidate it. I was awkward, unused to standing so close to him without a crisis unfolding. We burned the pasta. We set off the smoke alarm, which brought 2 guards running into the kitchen with their weapons drawn, only to find us waving dish towels at the ceiling. And we laughed, sitting on the kitchen counter at 2 in the morning, eating burned pasta straight from the pot. We talked, not about Volkov, or tactics, or moles. We talked about Ohio, about the neighborhood in Brooklyn where he grew up, about my dreams of being a therapist, about his father's love for old cars. We were learning a new language, a normal one. A few nights later, he asked me to walk with him. "No, Diego," I asked, pulling on the coat he'd given me. It felt like a lifetime ago. "No, Diego," he confirmed. We walked out of the iron gates. No SUV, no guards, just us. We walked for miles, eventually finding ourselves in the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge. The city lights of Manhattan glittered ahead, no longer a distant, impossible dream. The wind was cold, whipping my hair across my face. We stopped, leaning on the railing, the hum of the traffic a low vibration beneath our feet. "Arya." His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "You're free. The agreement we made, it's void. Volkov is gone. Your mother is safe. You have the fund. You've earned your freedom more than anyone I know." He took a breath. I told Bianca to prepare the annulment papers. They'll be ready to sign tomorrow. You can walk away. No strings. I looked out at the water, a dark, churning ribbon below. Free. It was the only thing I'd wanted. I could leave. I could have my old life back or some version of it. But the thought of walking away, it left me cold. The thought of leaving this man, who was so much more than the monster I'd first met, felt wrong. It felt incomplete. He wasn't just my captor. He had become my partner. He had listened to me. He had trusted me. He had changed his entire operation, his entire code, based on my belief in him. And what if I don't want to sign them? I asked. My voice so quiet I wasn't sure he'd heard me. He turned, his face cast in the shadows of the bridge. That was a contract, Aria. It was signed under duress. It wasn't real. It saved my life, I said, turning to face him. It saved my mother. It saved your organization. It feels more real than anything else that's ever happened to me. He stepped closer. The air between us was thick, no longer with fear, but with a fragile, terrifying hope. I won't force this, he whispered, his voice rough. This part, it has to be a choice. It has to be voluntary. I know. I reached out, my hand trembling, and laid it on his chest. I could feel his heart hammering, a steady, powerful beat under my palm. I'm not the girl who crashed her car anymore. I'm not your prisoner. I'm standing here on my own. And I'm choosing. He looked down at my hand, then up at my eyes. Slowly, he covered my hand with his own. His skin was warm. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was an acceptance. Okay, he breathed. Okay, Aria. The forced marriage, the paper signed in that cold church, was dissolved. But the real one, the one built on respect and truth and a shared, brutal past, was just beginning. We were quiet for a week. We were learning how to be normal. Until Bianca called us into the study. She didn't look happy. She looked pale. The FBI sweep of Volkov's penthouse found something, she said, her voice tight. A hidden safe. Inside, there was a single military-grade audio recorder. She placed it on the desk and pressed play. We heard Volkov's voice, cold and smooth. The Santoro problem is being handled. Then, another voice. It was American, smooth, polished, dripping with the privilege of old money and untouchable power. It was a voice I'd heard on the news. Handled isn't gone. Sergei, the voice laughed. I brought you in to manage the port. Santoro's refusal to play ball, his father's stubborn morality, it's a financial liability. Don't make your problem my problem. It will be dealt with, Volkov said. His voice was respectful, subservient. See that it is, Mr. X. The recording clicked off. I looked at Luca, the peace, the normalcy of the last week, shattered. Volkov wasn't the monster. He was just the monster's employee. Mr. X, I whispered, the name tasting like acid. He's in this city, Luca said, his voice flat and cold as iron. He reached over and took my hand, his grip not voluntary, but absolute. And he's next. 1 year, 365 days since the night I crashed my car. 365 days since I'd signed a paper in a cold church, trading my name for my life. The air in the new Santoro Collins Health Access Center smelled like fresh paint, strong coffee, and, if I let myself get poetic, hope. It was a bright, open space in Red Hook. The neighborhood Father Aurelio had served, built from the ground up. I stood in the pharmacy. The main wall facing the waiting room was floor-to-ceiling glass. There were no hidden loading docks, no skimmed inventories, no phantom patients. Every bottle, every prescription was accounted for, logged in a transparent system I had designed myself. The 3-month numbers are in Aria. Mark, our head clinician, said, holding up a tablet. Our community relapse rate, it's down nearly 15% since we opened. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a year.
That's good. That's a start.
It was more than a start. It was a victory. It was the entire point. Next door, in the same building, was the new community office of Santoro Legal. Bianca, who had a 9-month-old baby boy at home, was in her element, but she wasn't just defending Luca's assets anymore. She was running a new, fully funded pro bono division, her team, all sharp young lawyers who worshipped her, specialized in one thing, seeking justice for victims of organized crime. They helped families whose businesses had been strong-armed, witnesses who had been intimidated, people who, like my mother, had been used as pawns. Luca had kept his promise, not just to me, but to his father's memory. The Santoro family was gone. In its place was the Santoro Global Logistics and Security Group. It was licensed. It was bonded. It was legitimate. He'd sold off the last of his father's dark assets and reinvested everything into high-end, licensed private security, the kind Diego now trained with a focus on non-lethal intervention and fully transparent, clean shipping logistics. He was still the most powerful man I knew, but his power no longer came from the shadows. It came from being the only man in his world who operated, relentlessly, in the light. But the light cast shadows. I woke up, my heart hammering, the sheets soaked in a cold sweat. The sound was still in my ears. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause. I sat up, gasping for air in the quiet darkness of our bedroom. Luca was instantly awake, sitting up, his hand on my back. "The beacon?" he asked. His voice was rough with sleep, but steady. I nodded, burying my face in my hands. "I'm in the panic room. I can't open the door. Bianca is bleeding." "Hey." He moved, turning on the small bedside lamp, flooding the room in a soft, warm light. He took my hands. "Look at me. You're not there. You're here. You're in our home. Bianca is fine. She's probably complaining about her nanny. You're safe." I leaned into him, his warmth anchoring me to the present. The nightmares were less frequent now, but they were still there. The sound of the bomb wire snapping, the smell of smoke and fear, the sight of my father tied to that chair. I was healing, but healing isn't a straight line. It's an ongoing process. The next day, I sat in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. This was my other front line. "My name is Arya," I said, my voice quiet. "It's been about a year, and I still have nightmares. I'm still afraid to drive when it rains." The man next to me, a bodega owner who had testified against a local gang, nodded. "I hear you. I still check under my car. Every morning." This was my group, my witness therapy. We were the survivors, the ones who had seen the gears of the city's underbelly and had lived to talk about it. We weren't weak, we were just scarred. And here, our scars were proof that we had made it. My new life wasn't just about work and healing. It was about building. On a bright Sunday, we stood in the same humble church where we had mourned Father Aurelio. The pews were packed, not with soldiers, but with our new community. My mother, looking happier than I'd seen her in years, sat in the front row, holding hands with Diego's wife. The staff from the clinic were there. The families Bianca had helped were there. Bianca stood at the front, her eyes shining, holding her son, Leo. Luca and I stood beside her. "Do you, Luca Santoro, and you, Arya Collins, take responsibility as godparents for this child?" the priest asked. "We do," we said in unison. Luca took Leo from Bianca. He looked different. All the iron, all the hard lines that defined him, just melted. He held the baby with a confidence and tenderness that made my heart ache. This was our new family, born not from blood oaths and fear, but from choice and shared purpose. We were witnessing a new life, and in turn, Our community was witnessing us. That night, the house was quiet. The mansion, once my prison, was now just home. Luca found me on the terrace, the same one where we'd stood when the lights went out. The garden below, once destroyed by the assault, was in full bloom. "It's quiet," I said, leaning against the railing. "Too quiet?" he asked. "No, it's just right." He stood beside me, not touching, just sharing the space. We looked out at the lights of Manhattan, no longer a symbol of escape, but just a view. "Aria." I turned. His face was serious, but the hardness was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that I knew he reserved only for me. "That day on the bridge," he started, his voice a little rough. "When you said you'd stay, when you chose to stay." "I remember," I said softly. It was the first time in my life that something good wasn't taken, or forced, or negotiated. It was just given. He took a small, hesitant breath. But I realized, our marriage, the real one, it started with a promise to survive. It started in the middle of a war. He reached into his pocket. My heart didn't stop. It just opened. "The war is over," he said. "I want to start over. The right way. No force, no fear." He didn't kneel. He just stood in front of me, meeting my gaze. He opened his hand. It wasn't a giant, vulgar diamond. It was a simple, elegant platinum band with a small, perfect sapphire, the color of my eyes. "Aria Collins," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't have imagined a year ago. "I don't want you to be my wife because protocol demands it. I want you to be my wife because you are the only person I trust. You are the only person who sees me, and who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. You are my moral compass." He took my hand. "Will you marry me for real this time? A kindness first promise. No one else. Just you and me." Tears were streaming down my face, but I was smiling. "Yes, yes, Luca, 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. He didn't kiss me with a desperate Hollywood passion. He leaned in and pressed his forehead against mine, his hands holding my face like I was the most precious thing in the world. It was a kiss of profound, quiet, and absolute consent. It was a promise. We were safe. We were whole. We were starting our future. We were wrong. 2 weeks later, we were in the study, reviewing the plans for a new wing of the clinic. My laptop, which was open on the desk, pinged an email. It was from an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was one word: "Congratulations." "Luca," I said, my voice suddenly tight. I opened it. There was no text, just a single high-resolution photograph. It was him, Mr. X, the voice from the recording, the man who had owned Volkov. I knew his face from the news, from the charity galas, from the political rallies. He was shaking hands, a wide, public smile on his face. He was shaking hands with the mayor of New York, and standing right next to them, also smiling, was the city's police commissioner. My blood turned to ice. Luca stood behind me, his hands gripping the back of my chair. "He wasn't just Volkov's boss," Luca whispered, his voice a low, cold vibration. "He is the city." The war wasn't over. We had just won the first battle. Volkov was a symptom. This was the disease. I looked at the ring on my finger. Then I looked at the man standing beside me. I closed the laptop. Our past wasn't something we could erase. The crash, the fear, the blood, it was part of our story. But it wasn't the end of our story. Love doesn't wipe the slate clean. It gives you a reason to fight for the future. I stood up and took Luca's hand. He was right. We were just getting started. True power wasn't about bullets or fear, or the kind of control Mr. X had. I'd learned that true power was standing your ground. It was protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. And we were just getting started.